The O Cannabis Conference and Expo returns to Toronto June 1st through the 3rd, and there's still some good booth locations available. This exciting event is free for cannabis retailers and will feature Tommy Chong receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the O Cannabis Industry Awards. For more information about exhibiting or to register to attend, go to ocannabis.com. That's OCANNABIZ.com.
Welcome back to The Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today we've got Mike West. He is the chemist for Embark. Also Marcus Richardson, aka Bubble Man, in the house representing Embark and some other ventures we're going to get into. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on The Talking Hedge.
Thanks for having us, Josh.
Appreciate it.
Long time no see.
Yeah. So, Mike, we were talking in the green room offline about, when I first met you was in 2015 at Green Lion. First time I even heard about kind of concentrates, this weird thing with blow torches, and didn't know what was going on. It looked weird. So before we get into Embark and what you guys are up to, tell me a little bit about how you got into the game, what you were doing at Green Lion, and why it's no longer around, maybe, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I originally got in the game, had a sister who had severe epilepsy. I had mild epilepsy, so I had to get into the game actually as a teenager looking for cannabis. I ended up moving to school in Colorado because Colorado had a medical program. After I studied kind of biochemistry in college, ended up getting into the medical industry where I was growing and in the medical scene. And as Colorado passed recreational, they created what was called vertical integration, where everything you sold at your retail store, you had to grow yourself. And as somebody who was trying to create medical products for patients, that really limited the patient reach that I could produce. So I ended up moving in 2011 up to Washington State to actually, get into the medical scene there. When I read Washington's law compared to Colorado's law, it allowed vertical separation where the retailers had to be separated from the producers. So the producers kind of had a fair shake in the game. They could create businesses, create products, medical products or recreational products, and sell them to all the dispos or retailers as they got licensed. So I ended up partnering with a couple of people to start Green Lion. Great group of guys that we ended up founding. We started as a medical dispensary, I guess medical collective at the time, and basically a group of people that had their own medical farms. And then as we we would rent booths at a local farmers market. There was actually at the time there were cannabis farmers markets in Washington. Those need to come back, but we ended up using that farmers market as a way to kind of, create a brand that we called Green Lion. Green Lion is actually a reference to an alchemical extraction dating back to the 1400s. Back then, chemistry wasn't a thing, but they were actually using what was called aqua vitale, ethanol moonshine, to extract plant botanical oils and calling it Green Lion.
We started this extraction lab, started medical, got it recreationally licensed. Ended up, having a disagreement with a couple of the other founders because, after we got it to a point where we were generating a couple $100K a year, the goal was to create a employee-owned company. And the investor decided that he wanted to sell the company to other investors instead of, issuing shares and options to the employees that, really did the groundwork. We were all paying ourselves minimum wage just to get it started. So after, a couple of people tried to get shares and didn't get them, they ended up dipping out. I dipped out to the state of Illinois, helped create a license out there called Cresco. Cresco was another awesome group of people setting up a medical lab. Illinois was super heavily regulated. So, I was able to kind of set up not only a dry sift bubble hash, but also a butane and CO2 extraction lab for them. That way they could get in and start distributing products through the Illinois market. I've actually, dating all the way back to the time that I was a medical patient, I was always using kind of bubble bags as kind of my staple go-to to be able to produce bubble hash. Because I used to follow Mark on all the internet forums, but back before we had these beautiful things called streaming. So, as I was kind of watching the industries evolve, Illinois created a semi-monopoly market. I think there's 15 companies operating just over 20 licenses in the medical market. That's changed now that Rex opened up, but it created a kind of real limited market, but heavily regulated. So it allowed for me to learn the ropes on, creating GMP labs with kosher labs, in heavily regulated markets, so that as the other markets opened up on the East Coast, I could start kind of helping those markets set up labs. So I ended up moving back from Illinois to Washington State, get close to the family in Spokane, operated a CBD lab, a THC rec lab, and then did a bunch of consulting. And as part of that, I found out that Mark was working on getting his rec license up in BC, and BC, has a federal law that allows patients to federally register, get federal protections, cultivate 4 plants, which we can't do in Washington State currently. And it was a kind of much better program because, as a medical patient, the last thing I want to do is get thrown in jail. I've already been thrown in jail for cannabis, and we don't need to see that happen again. Patients are unduly harmed. And, one of the things that I hope happens is that as U.S. federal law changes, we actually see some sort of way that we can address a lot of the, negative consequences of that prohibition has created in many of the communities. So, Mark was looking at creating this awesome lab here in BC, as well as another lab in Ontario. Mark has a ton of experience doing solventless labs, and my experience is more in the solvent side, using things like alcohol, butane, propane, and CO2. So I kind of look at cannabis extraction more as in the chemistry side, whereas Mark looks at it being able to use, mechanical separation and physics to be able to isolate those glandular trichromes to produce the highest quality hashes. So the two of us started talking early on, 2+ years ago, planning on how we can get a lab operating up here. And, BC, it being a federal program, it took us almost a year to get our building rezoned, re-permitted, building permits, get it partially built out so we could actually turn a portion of it into a license and get it licensed. So we actually were able to finally get it licensed last April. Last March. We went live last April. And then last 6 months, we've been operating essentially B2B, producing hash for the other farms in and around BC or in and around Canada. Well, it's a federal program, so we can process for anyone in the country. So we've been basically operating the Bubble Hash Lab, custom design systems that Whistler Technology built, and then built around kind of 2 Mark spec, as nice ice as we can have, this beautiful RO filtration system, producing, real fine micron specific bubble hash that we then, cryogenic or super cold and freeze dry, and then kind of blend in order to make a couple different grades of hash. So those different types of hash that we're producing in that bubble hash room are allowing us to then kind of roll out the next section of rooms that we're building out, which is the dry sift, pressed hash, and all those other types of hash. So,
I know you're into full melt as well, so I kind of want to get into some of those details. But so to clarify, Mike, when you went out to Illinois, was that Cresco Labs? When you say Cresco,
you got it.
Did you get paid in share and cash, or was that just? I'm just curious. You
options and cash.
Okay, interesting. So still private. That could be an interesting thing. We'll have to do another podcast on. So Mark, tell me a little bit about your journey into the cannabis space, and maybe in that description, tell me why I like hash so much. I just thought it was old school before I learned about all these other things that I'll let you dive into: terpenes, flavonoids, all that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll whip through it because it's kind of a long story. I've been at this for over 30 years. Started as a hemp activist out in Manitoba. When I was quite young, 17 years old, I was getting really hard and heavy into cannabis. I'd smoked it around 14. And so I was 3 years in and I was exponential grower. Like it was like I tried a joint and then I bought an ounce and then I had a quarter pound. And then I was just like going fast through the levels. And my dad saw it and he said, look, if you're going to do this, you know, do it right, because you're living in an area where they'll put you in a cage with actual dangerous people. And so I looked into starting as a hemp activist with some partners of mine, Martin Moravchik and Alex Schwieski, back in the Manitoba hemp days. We got hemp growing in 1995 for the first time in over 73 years in our province, based on the work we did, approaching our Minister of Finance and our Minister of Agriculture. My partners went on to start a company called Manitoba Harvest, which recently sold for $419 million to the Tilray Group. Prior to that, they sold the company to the Compass Group down in California for 132 million US dollars, I believe. So the company was a great success. I left Manitoba in 96, came out to British Columbia, linked up with Hillary Black, who was founding the BC Compassion Club. About a year later, I helped facilitate that club and did everything I could for them. I would philanthropy, you know, I was a cannabis broker at the time. And so any kind of extra cannabis I had, I made sure it went to the club. And I did everything I could for the club until eventually I ended up getting in some trouble for the club. They were asking me to carry some cannabis home for them because people were breaking into their shops. I ended up getting caught up with some pounds at a roadblock, which has all been, you know, long gone now. This was 1998. But what it did is it led me to start a new company called Fresh Headies. And it led me to start to popularize and bring to the world cold water ice extraction. I coined the term bubble hash. I coined the term bubble bags. And I gave myself the silly moniker that is Bubble Man, not really thinking it would stick. So I was out here doing the bubble bags. I rocked that out for the last 22 to 23 years. Since 1999, March was when the birth of that company happened. In fact, 3 doors over from the house I'm sitting in right now is the house my wife sewed the very first bubble bags in 1999. And so throughout that, obviously, you know, over the years of teaching people how to do this, I sort of unwittingly became a voice of authority on the subject. And, you know, often sometimes thrown around that term expert, not one that I like so much because I think of myself as a student. But so a lot of people started, you know, coming to me. And as the industry grew and grew, I did a company in Jamaica called Cannabinoid Research and Development. Unfortunately, picked the wrong partners for that. The Jamaican partners were amazing. The American partners, not so much. So that faltered and has just sort of fell flat. Then I hooked up with a tissue culture company called Segra International, and I started doing some consulting for them, which is, they're an amazing company. You could do a whole other podcast on. I started working with Whistler Technologies to industrialize and design equipment to commercialize the process of water and ice extraction. And then very soon in the same sort of timeline, my 2 founding partners, Michael Curtis and Bruce Dawson Scully, approached me and said, hey, we're starting this company. We want you we want you as our extractor, and it's an extraction company. We don't really want, you know, like, you're the guy for us. And it was just different from when Canopy and some of the other bigger companies approached me, which were like, we want to lock you into a non-compete. We want to make you work for us and no one else ever in the industry, which, you know, someone who's been in the industry for 25 to 30 years, a company requesting them to sign a non-compete disclosure and all these other things is kind of greasy. And Bruce and Michael just weren't having any of it. They were like, no, we don't want to control you. We don't want to wrap you up. We want you to be doing exactly what you're doing out in the world. And we want to make things so sweet at Embark that you're just going to naturally bring things to Embark. And it's exactly how it played out. It's like, instead of going into this fear and scarcity corporate vibration that most corporations are stuck in, they kind of fell into this more love and abundance and said, hey, we'll just make it work out. And so that's the reason I joined Embark, because they didn't want to control me the way every other company wanted to control me. And so the minute they approached me, I went home that night. I wrote like a 5-page document on what my vision was for Embark. And it was, you know, it was unique because I'm a solventless guy. So for me to decide that I wanted to create a 7 to 8 modality quiver and involve CO2, ethanol, hydrocarbon, terpene extractions, dry sift, rosin, bubble hash, all of these processes, I thought, let's create a quiver. And the first and only name that came to mind for my chemist was Mike West. I had been hanging out with him on my show Hash Church, on our show Hash Church, really, a show that we've done on Sundays over the course of the last 5 years, starting in 2015, which was, you know, very well received, millions of views, hundreds of thousands of people have seen this show. And it just sort of connected us to this dialogue of constantly sharing and talking and being very open, quite the opposite thing that companies want you to do. The problem is when you try to hold your IP and you try to be quiet and you try to control, you go nowhere. And when you open the dialogue and you engage with everyone and you pull from all these different, unique, brilliant minds, you go everywhere. And so that is kind of the foundation of Embark, how it happened with, you know, Michael and Bruce approaching me the way they did. You know, Mike Curtis, he was getting a dozen calls a month at least for people. Hey, can you come build my, hey, can you come over here and build my, and so I wasn't sure that Mike was going to have time for me, but lo and behold, he was like, dude, I got time for you. And he came up to Canada and we started the ball rolling, and he's been, you know, he's been an absolute essential part of the company because, you know, both Mike and I, starting at the facility, starters, we're janitors. We're sweeping floors, we're cleaning toilets, we're cleaning bathrooms, we're cleaning walls. And then slowly now we're getting into construction, and now we're construction workers. We're building walls, we're getting electricians. And Mike had dealt with literally all of the construction workers at the facility. He was hired as a chemist. He's literally done everything but chemistry since we started. I mean, everything. You can't imagine. People got this guy, oh, there's wires hanging out of, oh, can you go deal with the computer? Can you? He is a man of 1,000 hats. And I personally am just so excited because we're now getting so close. Mike touched on it a little bit about the hash that we've been making. So we've been making this bubble hash. It's the first product that we're going to be bringing to the market, and it's going to be under our brand Hazel, which Stephanie and the team did an amazing job on all the graphics for Hazel. Really cool oranges and yellows and blue colors. The name is Hank Co. And we made some beautiful Afghan Kush bubble hash. I learned from the industry that, you know, I can't just do 8 microns of bubble hash, because if you're familiar with bubble hash, there's 8 different bags in my kit. Well, at the end of it, when I thought in this la la land that we were just going to start selling individual microns, while the system is set up a little bit differently, and although Canada is an amazing system, there still are some things like if we are ordering for a province like the province of British Columbia, and they want to order some of our products, we need to make sure we have an order prepared for them and almost another order or 2 waiting for them, because if they sell out and order more and we don't have it, you kind of drop to the queue. So having like that much 90 micron specific hash was next to impossible. So what we did is we discussed breaking down the microns into a couple of grades, like a mid THC and a high THC. So our Hank is, one of them is darn near 70% THC, and that's the orange one that says high THC on the screen there. And you can see it's a blend of 45, 73, 90, and 120 micron. And then the microns that were left over from that SKU go over to the mid THC, which is a funny term because it's 61.4%, not even 10% less in the THC realm. Some of the highest hash, the 61 is just below, I think the next highest in the market is 65. So our 70 will definitely be the highest THC content in the market. And so those are the first 2 SKUs. We do have a variety of brands coming down the line. There's also the Hazel, which Mike can sort of scroll down. You can see right there, we've got our Hank Bubble Hash, our Hank Dry Sift. You've got Hazel. Hazel's going to be a very unique product for Embark because it's a product that some good friends of mine were making for years and years and years. And we got the technology and brought it into the legal platform. And these are pure hash joints that have no paper. They have no glue. They are literally hash rolled into a perfect joint. It's a 1 gram product. It's the most amazing celebratory joint you'll ever smoke. Dude, it is so cool. Every time I've ever lit one of these with people, they've just been like, That is unbelievable. Wow. So this product, I mean, don't get me wrong, the bubble hash is going to be a major differentiator for us. I just recently toured a bunch of stores and I walked around and I said, how are you guys for bubble hash? And a lot of them were like, well, the bubble hash isn't that exciting. And I'm like, yeah, well, I've seen a lot of what's out there, and you're right, it's not very exciting. And so what we're trying to do, the people who actually coined the term bubble hash, is release a product that is respectful of the term and the name that I named back in 1999 to describe a very specific type of hash, one that bubbled and melts. And so our high THC bubble hash is definitely going to do that. I did keep off the terminology full melt, if you've noticed. That connects to my integrity. I haven't been able to throw any of this into a bowl and melt it and watch it boil and bubble. There's no mechanisms available for me to do that. What I did do is I took a tiny little bit and I pressed it very gently just to see the melt factor. And I turned it into a stained glass window piece of like gold leaf flake. So I know the hash is going to be proper, but because I haven't seen it, I refuse to put the terminology full melt. And we had it on there probably 5 or 6 times. I asked the team to take it off until we can confirm with our customer base that it is indeed full melt. And only then will we put the term full melt. And I do that as well because that's another term that I coined back in 1999, 2000 with Skunkman Sam. And I refuse to use terms that were coined for very specific descriptions to use them on things that are not that description. And I've already seen in the market companies that have put full melt, and lo and behold, the hash itself is not full melt. So maybe you want to talk about full melt.
I was curious about Embark actually before we kind of get into details about this merger that you guys have, Hank and Hazel as the product. So Mike, you ended up leaving the United States to go to Canada because you said it was easier with the federal laws that they had. It was easier for you to conduct business up there, and so you went and did you start Embark up in Canada?
I'll say that it's much more heavily regulated than many of the states, especially the recreational states. However, when you look at taking a business, from being able to create medical products and getting those products to anyone in the world, any medical patient in the world, if I want to export a CBD product in the States, I have to be able to get a GMP certification on that CBD lab, get your products registered, and then apply for import and export permits, and still hope that the customs doesn't seize your products. So here in Canada, it's a federal program, so it actually allows for us to, we're currently located in BC, but we're also building a facility in Ontario. We're kind of focusing on processing material that's here in BC, and obviously rolling out products. We're currently licensed to sell product in BC. We just got our license to sell products in Alberta, but it's basically we have to apply to each one of the provinces to sell our hash in that province. But since it's a federal program, I can sell to any one of the provinces. And for that matter, since it's a federal program, we can export our products overseas, both CBD and THC. So, when you're looking at it as there's still a whole federal US medical program that has to be passed. The FDA is going to have to get involved to license a bunch of medical producers in the US. And then some number of years after the federal medical interstate commerce begins, then they'll start allowing federal recreational. Canada is a couple years behind Washington, some of the West Coast states, states like Washington, Oregon, California, and Colorado. Those states were the laboratories of democracy that tested how the programs would work. And some of them have pros and some of them have cons. Canada, passed a federal program. So even though medical's been going on in Canada longer than many of the US states, it being a federal program and now being a recreational federal program, it allows us to roll out products across the entire country here in Canada, as well as potentially exporting products overseas. So it's, even though it's a, it is a much more heavily regulated product, we have to comply to what's called GPP, good production practices, which essentially means that we have to be inspected and we have to keep track that everything gets sterilized from the ceilings to the floors and every piece of equipment in between. Now, because we're intending to produce medical products as well, we're proactively building a facility that's going to be GMP accredited as well. But GMP accreditation, is primarily documentation, SOPs, and all of that, as well as, being independently accredited, where we have independent inspectors come in and make sure that every surface is sterile because we've designed it to be sterile. We wipe it down, we sterilize every surface, and we're not doing things that could potentially cross-contaminate the products. So it's Canada is, relatively as complicated as some of the limited license states on the Midwest and East Coast, but when you jump through all those loopholes and spend the year to get licensed, it opens up a much larger market. Now, as you mentioned, I'm an American. I'm a cannabis refugee in Canada. I had to apply for a work visa, and it took me almost 9 months to get that work visa in order to actually come up here. That was a 1-year work visa. Fortunately, my wife has a dual residency. She's Canadian and American, so we've already applied for a permanent residency. But COVID makes applying for work visas and applying for permanent residencies a lot more complicated. But to be honest, as a medical patient, it's who comes from Idaho, which, if you follow the news, Idaho is not a cannabis friendly state. Do I want to go to Idaho and potentially be arrested and thrown in jail for 3 to 5 to 10 years? Or do I want to live somewhere that allows me to not only produce products in a licensed and safe market, but also be able to work with universities on a federal level and do research? We can do that here. We can't in the States without jumping through all the licenses. And even when you have big multi-state operators backing you, doing the federal research requires you to jump through all of NIDA's loopholes. And they're, good luck getting one of those federal NIDA supply licenses. I know I've known multiple people who have applied, but they're just stonewalling it. And, I hope that with the new administration, we're going to see some of that, glacial speed up. But ultimately, it's going to have to come through the laboratories of democracies that we call state markets, moving the ball. And as that median of kind of what people find acceptable shifts, then you're going to be able to see it open up. Now, there are things, Washington, California has much better laws in regards to packaging and branding. Here in Canada, we have to be fairly discreet with our branding. It can't have bright colors. We can't have fun display stuff. Our retail packaging has to be fairly nondescript. You can't see the product. It has to be an opaque jar, and it has to be covered by these THC warnings and by government warnings that require that we actually have, I think, 8 different warnings that we have to cycle through on all of our packaging in a random assortment. Mm-hmm. So the government of Canada has not made packaging fairly friendly, but we're going to see that as people become more accustomed to it, as people can understand how it's going to be, what's going to happen is you're going to see the loosey-goosey states kind of tighten down on some of the regulations that are allowing for some of the oversupply and traditional market growth, while at the same time you're going to see some of the licensed markets, even though it's a pain in the ass to be an early adopter, mm-hmm. Once you become that early adopter, you can distribute not only nationally but internationally. And I think it's a good lesson for all the people that are debating jumping, staying in the traditional market or getting licensed. If you get a state license, when the federal licenses come, you're going to have a state license. So when federal laws change, any multinational or publicly traded company is going to have to either invest in an existing license or buy an existing license if you're in a state-by-state basis. Mm. That's basically your way into another state. And so it's going to, right now, many of those state-by-state licenses are primarily angel investors or small groups of investors that are investing into the companies. Whereas as your market grows to a point where you can become a multi-state operator or list to become a publicly traded company, your responsibilities end up growing as well as a founder or as a employee of a company. So you have to be a lot more diligent on fiduciarily. You have to be diligent on disclosures and all that stuff. But it makes it fun. I like the idea of taking getting people in the traditional market transition through angel investors to launching brands and then bringing those brands public. So.
Beautiful. I think it's interesting that both of you guys had similar experiences that brought you all to the same place. Mike, you with Green Lion, you wanting the employee-owned benefits, and then Mark, you down in Jamaica had your own issues down there with mishaps and management with the U.S. sector, and now you guys are there together, learning from your experiences and building this awesome company that you both are proud to be a part of. So I'm super excited about that hash joint right there. I can't wait till the borders open up, because that's going to be one of the first things I do is roll up there and smoke me that hash joint. Where can people find you at? Any plugs you want to put in at this point? Let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so we have sales amendments in BC and in Ontario. I'll just kind of scroll up to this top page. So Bubble Hash and is going to market as we speak. We're basically shipping to Alberta and shipping to BC. We've announced our sales amendments. We're moving from the West Coast to the East Coast and just applying for sales amendments in each province as we go. And as we get the sales amendments in each province, we're also going to be rolling out new products within each province. So we're getting Bubble Hash, getting dry sip, and getting pressed hash onto the market before 420. Also trying to get the rosin as well as the hazel sticks, ideally before 420 or early spring. Didn't get to touch on it yet. Meridian, our topical line, is going to be a nano-infused topical that's coming to market in the early spring. And then our beverage infused drink is going to be coming essentially late spring and early summer.
Perfect. So, we're going to put some links in the show notes where people can find you on social media as well as your website. And with that, I think we're going to roll this one up. I want to thank my guest, Mike West. He is the chemist with Embark, as well as Marcus Richardson. He is the founder he's the bubble man, basically. That's it right there. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out. Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.
How do cannabis CEOs balance growth and optimization strategies? What is THCO, Delta-10, and CBNA, and why should you care about these minor cannabinoids? And why isn't the endocannabinoid system covered in medical school? Most people think they're up to date in trends in the cannabis industry, but they're about 6 weeks behind. Learn about what is truly next in the cannabis space by joining myself, Brian Fields, and Kellen Finney every week on the Dime Podcast, and of course, on PodConnects.